So, my name is Sandren, and I work for Nixon, which is a cybersecurity consultancy. I'm based out of the Netherlands, from Amsterdam, and I run the Dutch identity practice. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why trust is important, how it relates to different cultures. I'm originally from Sweden, but I lived in the US for a while, and I also lived in Germany and the UK. And it's very interesting to see how things like trust actually isn't a fixed factor. It's very dependent on the culture you're in. And then I'm going to talk about the implementation options and what we see in the marketplace, that how are actually firms implementing this. So, who do you trust and why? Well, so if you look at the space, there's basically two different drivers. One is avoiding being fined by GDPR, because there's a lawyer who said that I have a audit finding. And the other part is about building trust with your consumers, with your end customers. You see here there's a survey in the UK that consumers trust banks. They don't trust internet brands. So what that means is that one of the biggest assets that banks have to stop the fintechs coming in and taking over their business is the trust that the consumers have in them. And you see that there's a lot of additional value and avoidance of friction if there's trust. So Boston Consulting Group here has seen that if you can offer a short, clear, easy to understand explanation of what you're going to do with data, then 56% of the consumers are more likely to do business. So obviously, if you are the internet brand, one of the things you need to have to compete with the banks is to have a good and clear content management system. Likewise, if you're a bank, you might be start falling down the list. And that could be very bad for your business. So, customer trust. So this is a very kind of cultural integrated thing. So you have two pictures here. First one is me and my twin kids. And it's taken in the Vondel Park in Amsterdam. And there's something that's very strange with that picture. See if there's anyone here in the audience that can see what is wrong with it. The helmet. Obviously, me being Swedish and American, there you wear helmets. So no Dutch person wears helmets. You can see the other picture is that what you do instead, no helmet, and you have your kids standing on the back of your bike. So there's obviously kind of very different approaches here to how you protect your kid. Now, the Dutch and the Scandinavian societies, how they plan their cities and how the legal frameworks works is quite different. So I would not recommend the Dutch approach in the US, because then you probably are signing up your kid for being an organ donor. Obviously, the American approach works, but we were called the helmet family when we moved over to the Netherlands. So the same thing with trust, that these things are very different depending on the culture you're coming from. And you see that, for example, in Germany, data privacy is very important. The Dutch, which is just on the other side of the border, don't care as much about it. You see things like fine-grained consent is more important in the Dutch market than perhaps in the Scandinavian market. So it's something when you transfer your product from one market to the other, that may mean that you have to look at how you handle consent and adapt to it. So what we've seen after, just like the previous speaker, is that a lot of drivers came from GDPR. What we're seeing is a move over to more looking at how do you ensure that you can keep your customers' trust. Because someone from Boston Consulting Group or someone else have talked to the chief marketing officer and they say that this is very important. So instead of a lawyer, you're now chased by Boston Consulting Group or McKinsey. Don't know what is worse. But what we see is that there's a few things you should do. So you need to explain what data you're gathering and what you can do with it. You need to have some form of ability to actually gather this content and store the evidence. You need to ensure that you have a version mechanism, because most likely at some point you're going to switch what data you're collecting and what you're going to do with it and why you do it. You need to have sure that you have some form of mechanism to re-ask when you make a major change, the reason why the processing. You need to ensure that there's some form of mechanism to withdraw consent. So if the consumer no longer wants consent to this processing, they can withdraw it. And once you have all of this in place, you can look at the more advanced things, such as fine-grained consent, and also the consent received. We're going to see the end of this talk. So the implementation options, how do companies do this? You see 4 different variants. So first thing is to switch to a modern customer and access management platform. So if you look 3 years ago, I don't think there were any of the big CIAM platforms that had real consent management. Today, most of the big ones have it. You can do a custom implementation of these workflows. You can use a backend service, but build the end user interface yourself. And you can do a step-by-step migration, either to a modern CIAM, or you can do it to a specific product that just does the consent management. So what does this look like? Well, this is a switch to a modern CIAM system. It does a number of different things. Federations as a login, as the identity provider in the system. It probably has a reverse proxy, and it has a consent management module. So this is of course a very good option. It ensures that you get a consistent user experience. The downside is that CIAM systems tends to be quite expensive. It's not very hard to burn 1 million or even 10 million euros on a CIAM rollout if you're an enterprise. And a big part of that is of course the integration that you tend to over time collect a lot of federations, and you tend to put a number of systems behind it as well if you use a reverse proxy approach. So a large part of the cost of doing a rollout of CIAM system, if you already have one, tends to be all of the retesting of the integrated systems. You can do a custom implementation of all the flows. Again, an important part of this is that you can get the same look and feel that you have on the rest of your site, and you get the exact look and feel you want. The disadvantage of this, usually you do it in the existing content management system, and usually you can use your current partner for doing it. It does take quite a lot of time, and take also quite a lot of investment, because although it looks like it's not that many flows, when you start breaking it down, it becomes a lot of flows. And also you have the problem that when you do something totally custom, you don't get any standard development that will give you new things. So every time you need to do something new, you have to bring in the custom developers. Something we're seeing this is quite new on the market, is that you basically say that, okay, I do need to have my custom user interface because I won't have the same user experience, but I can leverage a third-party product that does all of the workflows and also the storage. So this is like a good combination to get down the cost a bit compared to doing everything custom, but you still get the same kind of user interfaces and user experiences. So the last one is the step-by-step migration. So essentially, you get yourself either a new CIAM system or a specialized consent management system, and you basically federate out of your existing or the new when the user wants to do consent management. The main disadvantage here is that you will obviously either have to scan the CIAM system very thoroughly to get the same kind of user experience, or you will get that slightly different. It is also a good way to step over to a more modern system, because you can do all the new federations with the new system and keep all of the old systems hanging on the old, and you don't have to retest all of the integrations. So to just sum things up, to get about a minute left. So basically the whole space didn't really exist 3 years ago. So I was running the implementation for a large CIAM system for a global cable com about 3 years ago. And we were building the third generation of CIAM systems, and we didn't really talk about federation or consent management at that point. Something that's really showed up in the last couple of years, and it's of course driven by GDPR, but also by the fact that the consumers are getting more and more interested in the space. And it's gone from a very weird functionality to something that you do have to have. The importance here is also to look at the user experience. Obviously, from a GDPR perspective, that's perhaps not the most important thing, but from the Boston consulting groups, they will be very eager to point that out, that if you don't have the user experience, you don't really have a solution. Further questions?